place I'd rather be than with you.
Because I understand you do teach as well.
I do teach, usually in winter too, I find, when there's a period of when things are quiet. What I think is important, and I see this a lot with adults particularly, they've got portions of songs in their head, but never complete. And they know the riffs from all the famous songs, and these are the hobbyists, you know. The goal is to get them to play a song from beginning to end. And I give them an opportunity to look at that or consider it by choosing a song of their choice. And we use that as that's the work in progress. However long it takes for them to be able to play that composition completely and comfortably and with confidence, then what I've found, and this is general, is that once you get one song on board, the learning process is accelerated, I think. And each time you learn a new song, you've gleaned or got the information from the other stuff, and so you get better at it, you know. So that's kind of the goal. And so bypassing learning to read notation and stuff, a lot of them just don't want to learn that. They just want to cut to the chase. The internet's actually got, there's all these guides and these tutorials. There's bloody heaps of them, you know, and they're helpful. I say to them, okay, you can do that on your own, but you need a teacher, a good one particularly, so a teacher who knows this stuff, who is able to get a 360-degree view of you, and see where your strengths are and develop them from there, around that, you know. You taking something offline or out of a book, there's so much that you can learn. You just have to stick to it and follow the routines. But you'll never know while you're progressing unless you had somebody there to tell you what you need to do, to change things or to acknowledge that you've done well, you know.
Oh, good. So you haven't always been a musician?
Not really, no. I actually got into it quite late. I got into it when I was professionally, I was about 26. It was quite by accident. I was actually a chef. And after, and my dear late mum, she was determined that I'd go into the printing trade. But my brother actually, Stephen, both my brothers were printers. You know, I'd realised that cooking was and hospitality, and particularly food as a chef thing, that trade was calling, because it probably goes back to standing by the stove watching your mum cook, you know. I was a chef, and then, not by my own design, I'd had an accident. It was quite a bad one. I'd actually I was running quite an operation, and so I had to put it on hold, and I was in hospital, got skin grafts, and I got a phone call from a relation, and he was in Rotorua, and he's been on the circuit since he was a young guy, and he's made a name for himself down that. So he called me, he says, "You don't want to come down and maybe have a look at playing music?" And that's where the journey began professionally. I was in Rotorua, and I played with the Cuzzy, and the entertainment's officer from a P&O ship, the Oriana, was in town, and a musician who played the Rotorua scene had been on the ships for years, a gentleman by the name of Fraser Tahoe, and he'd brought these Brits in, you know, they were all English, and my cousin and I had quite a unique act. He was considered to be New Zealand's Stevie Wonder, so we got a invitation to play on board. They were determined on the spot to get us there, and I think what made it interesting was my cousin had the R&B pop sounds, and Rotorua was kind of a breeding ground really for a lot of New Zealand and those of Māori origin artists who were playing bars and clubs and nightclubs. And he had that stuff going on, and I was listening to Michael Franks, and I was listening to jazz, and I'd sort of kind of developing a flavour for that. So we were able to mix it up, and I could bring that sort of that particular those genres of music to our repertoire. And so it was we had a fairly broad repertoire based on that, and that fitted what they wanted on the ship, you know. And so we played in this bar called the Midships. On one side there was Poms and all the people from aboard, and there was Aussies on the other, and they were drinkers, and they liked the sing-along stuff, hey? And they sort of had standards, you know. So I've never practiced my arse off ever until I got on that bloody boat. I had to learn them. They'd sing along and they knew the words, you know. And then of course we went through the whole routine, and we finished after about 6 months. In my case, an uncle gave me his guitar and let me play it. It was a Maton, good guitars from Australia. And I hear that story often, particularly here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that a lot of guys just get these guitars around the house, so they pick them up. Most musicians I've come across either had a parent who played, or it was in the gene pool, or else they were in a household of music. Back to the question of education and learning the subject matter, so learning it properly. Eventually you're going to be working with people. If you're an air player, you're going to be working with people who are readers. If you choose to play in a contemporary style like jazz or something that's a little bit more sophisticated, eventually you will have to make that journey if you are to make the choices about what you want to play. Because what you're essentially looking at is you've got a road map in front of you and everybody's got the same map. So you're all reading off it. And that's the guide. There's your guide. And that's what you're sharing in common. Song, make it soft and low. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I decided that I would actually go along, hear some of these acts, encourage relationships with these people, and eventually jam. I mean, that's a three-letter word, that's, jam, and whatever that is. So you end up doing that. And then I think because at the time I was listening to a specific, to particular artists, and funnily enough, I got all my information about jazz through Playboy magazine, the jazz polls, and unashamedly, I think that might be shared by some of my contemporaries. Hugh Hefner, I would actually endorse him in that respect, because he also encouraged that industry. He really took what was essentially a genre that wasn't kind of like it wasn't highly popular, and somehow gave it sort of credibility. And so jazz does not get it should be given the recognition. Doesn't get the recognition it deserves. It is the foundation behind a lot of the great music, that the legacy that we see of Motown and others. All those session musician players would have studied in institute. America's got a highly developed sense of all of this. I admire America for that. Their learning institutes really lead the world. It's important. But I got in there and found other people, and we had a shared interest. So we jammed, and the next minute was, let's go and get some gigs. And my view was, well, hold on, we can make money out of this. This could become an earner. The one thing I have to say though, New Zealand music industry never got the respect, it never gets the respect that they have in Australia for their artists and America. Bigger populations, but we've taken it for granted. We have. And it goes back to the guy turning up at the house with his beers, crepe and a guitar. So it was taken for granted, And so the industry was never given that respect until some of our esteemed musicians had the guts to go overseas, or they decided to go overseas, and they got recognition there, and that's when the respect arrived. I'm glad to be here alone with my lover. She's like no other. Glad to see the horizon slowly coming. That is the most vital question you can ask yourself, because what we're looking at here is essentially your survival, your survival day to day. And there is a true appreciation when you are in a situation where you're facing lean times and there's not much work there, either work in the workforce, some sort of skilled thing, or service industry, whatever thing you're looking at, or else you're on one gig a fortnight or a week. There is that school, there is that tribe, if I want to call it, people who work as weekend, and they're weekend warriors. They play in a band or they have a hobby. They're the hobbyists, and so they can get one gig a week. If it's paid, it's a bonus. To make a commitment to it full time, you really have to think this out. You really have to look at what are the advantages, what is that goal for the next year or two, and what sort of earning capacity will I have? What it also means is that you either go out and go and get your own work if it's solo. If you're in a group, you speak to your colleagues, the interested party, of what your goals are, and you work as a team. A lot of the successful bands here in New Zealand, they did work as teams. They were all going off in different directions, finding things to do. They all had a routine, a role to play, you know. And those are the acts that become successful in the business and are able to procure full-time work. There is an option of either having a day job and then getting together with like-minded people and treating it as a creative hobby thing. Ain't no place I'd rather be than with you. It's actually what helps the cause is that variety will open more doors. Simple as that. Yeah. Variety means that you're able to cover most bases. The saying was at one time, jazz don't pay the bills, you know. And really, most people don't share an interest in listening to that particular music or art form. I learned this from Mark Murphy when I did this course at Stanford. I did a workshop at Stanford, just another bit. Did a jazz workshop at Stanford University with esteemed master singer, vocalist Mark Murphy. And one of the words of advice he'd given me, he said, okay, jazz don't pay the bills. He talked about it. He says, if you want to pursue this pathway, then you have to become judicious about what you're going to do, and you have to remain true to it, even in the lean times, and you'll face a lot of them, you know. When I cover other people's songs, I make it my own. I keep the melody intact, but I change the feel. I add certain chords in their structures to make it harmonically interesting. And I always get this one response every time. 9 out of 10 will say, I like the way the version you did of the song, the way you treat that song, you know. And unless, of course, somebody's requested particular songs for a function, then I'll do the original reproduction, you know. Right. And so we do it faithfully. But we make it interesting if we've got, say, great players. If it's a group ensemble, then I'll allow the pianist, particularly a chordal instrument, to colour the palette that's there, you know, the arrangement that's there, the chord patterns and whatever, and just add some more interesting things in there. So you can do that, and that's the soloing part, you know, and that's kind of the supportive role. What I found with Kevin is they're covering certain songs, standards, pop standards, or others. They might play a chord voicing, and then I'll just sort of get my voice to go there. I'll find what
so
notes.
You're finding the ninths, the 13ths.
Yeah, the ninth, exactly. The nuances, you know. It is just the 9, 11, 12, 13ths, you know, the 5, 7, 9, 11, 13ths, you know. And so I've got a good enough ear to hear it, and I can just sort of like phrase it, you know, sort of thing, and that works, yeah. But variety will open the doors. You know, that's kind of been at the forefront of a lot of popular music with a conscience. A lot of our traditions, a lot of our particularly oral traditions, in songs, they carry the map of the history of those people. You know.
Obviously, we're living in different times. It's not the 60s, you know. We're not crusading. It's not Woodstock.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
we have issues. You know, we're going back to the whole nuclear free. Remember who did that whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Mira Roy, yeah.
Yeah.
French Letter, that was the
French
album.
Letter, so that was other than being a great song,
it
actually spoke to the times of.
Yeah, it did. We had our version. We had our Bob Dylans and our the singer songwriters who did usually from through the people at the coalface, you know. Generally, let's say the working classes to an extent, you know. There are those who, with a political agenda in their songwriting, in their lyric writing. Okay, they've got that going on. There's a Leonard Cohen's and everybody else, and Arlo Guthrie and Willie Guthrie, and America particularly had them. And
so, do you steer clear of that?
in some ways, no. I don't have an agenda. No, I avoid that. It's too divisive, you know, divisive. All my love to you.
Because I know you do bring Maori flavour into your songs.
Yeah.
And that is part of what makes you unique, but it also makes it special.
Thank you.
So, we really love your music, but obviously, they are quite different cultures.
They are, yeah, well they are. I mean,
But there are some
they geographically are quite
yes.
one end of the world to the other. What I realised, and I think this, and I'm not a bloody ethnologist or whatever you want to call that. What I've found is, say, that allows cultures to have to unite and to have a common connection of some sort. In the case of talking about my specific journey, Māori and Scots, tribal, clannish thinking, I think plays a part in that. The values are similar. The values are similar, usually around injustices, perhaps, to an extent.
So they were staunch?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's that. I mean, where I care to reside, I reside in both, even though my mother's not here now. So I have an appreciation of both the inheritances that I have in my gene pool, And if to say, and what connects them, yes, maybe somebody else, a specialist, somebody who specialises in the subject would be able to elaborate. But I think the tribal clannish thing has allowed that to happen. And we have examples of it here, and numerous examples in this country of people who have Celtic, in this case, Celts, Māori family origins, and there's numerous people I could name, and they happen to all have profiles.
So obviously there's affinity for that clan thinking, tribal sense of community, sense of family, I think is very strong.
Very good, Deborah.
Yeah,
I think you nailed that's the.
Yeah, sense of family, and I think music also is very important for Scots and for Māori alike, for different reasons.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it serves that role.
And maybe there's a synergy in blending the two.
Very good word, synergy. Yeah, there is a synergy, and I think it's a mutual agreement too, and they meet halfway.
I think so. They come up with something nice and unique, and what I would call makes us Kiwi.
Well, it does. It also makes us Kiwi because I think we've all, if we look at it, just looking at the bigger picture here in New Zealand, Aotearoa, is that we've got people are starting to look into their own genealogy. I think a good stock settled here. I think we've got some. I think the New Zealand, the Kiwis are a decent young person. That deals in fairness and thankfully equality, and we can see that by our women's rights, that goes right back, and how our woman, our wahine toa, the warrior woman, Pākehā and Māori, who thankfully were able to bloody put things in perspective. Yes. I mean, God brought some sanity to this because, it makes absolute sense, and now that the ball is in your court now, and you're leading the way, and great. I think that's wonderful. It is, I think it's a great thing to happen. It's brought some real balance, I'm a living example of someone who is further down the track, and I don't mind declaring my age, and it's just a number, and 65. But I'm still able to acquire regular work. If I look at the artists, those who are prominent and who are recognised artists, who are still performing, I think they shared one thing in common. They were able to sort of think young, if that's the term to use. They kept. It's not just looking youthful or young. I think their outlook was fresh. It was childlike almost. Childlike where it was playful. Playful that manifested in how you dressed, and a style thing. That's what I liked about Miles. I mean, what I know of him, he was his own man in some to an extent, but he chose to look sharp, And this is trumpeter friend of mine, Kim Patterson. He was telling me about Miles Davis was playing as an example, was playing in Paris, and a countess after the concert came up to him and says, and Miles was dressed up in his gears, smooth and all that. He says, she always looks sharp, sort of stuff. And says, Mr. Davis, you played absolutely divine. And to be blunt, his answer was, fuck that shit, how did I look? His music already spoke for itself. But that was kind of like really what was behind that. So to an extent, to be able to perform, to be able to make a living as a performing artist, past a certain age, it is a number. But I believe that you should keep things fresh and embrace each day as a new experience. The structures that you have put in place are the ones that you've developed, that you've learned in your craft. You've learnt the language. There is a language that binds this whole thing. You stay true to that, so that others can share in it, and so they're able to travel on that journey, because there are pathways that have been navigated already. You know, that's what it is for me, and so you, to an extent, it pays to hustle a bit, you know, and travel around places. Don't make a nuisance of yourself. It's a bonus if you've got somebody else that you're working alongside that shares
the load.
Yeah, shares the load. We arrive at a conclusion that we're sharing in something that we both love, and it brings joy. And allows people to connect. And as we've seen, memories for a lot of people who have as they've got older, if they have memory issues, as an example, or they feel they've been left out, when they hear a piece of music, it takes them back. It's like the smell of a wood fire. You know, it has I think emotionally is probably the most strongest driver, you know, that I know of. And I never thought of it that way until I've been reminded by others, you know, older wiser heads who said, yeah, this is what they found on their journey. So
that's great.
That's all I can say about that, Deborah. You know, and
Thank you.
hopefully that was enough.
Thank you.
Enough information.
I thank you.